Maria Santos pressed her back against the cold brick wall of the alley, her breathing shallow and erratic. The neon lights from the street cast dancing shadows across her face as she fumbled for her phone with trembling fingers. 3 missed calls from her sister Carmen, 2 from her mother, and 17 from a number she didn't recognize but knew all too well. "I can't keep running," she whispered to herself, sliding down the wall until she sat on the grimy pavement. The sound of footsteps echoed from the main street, each one making her heart race faster. She closed her eyes and began to whistle softly, the melody her grandmother had taught her years ago when nightmares would wake her in the middle of the night. The Apache song had always calmed her, transported her to simpler times when the biggest worry was whether she'd finish her homework before dinner. Now, at 28, Maria faced demons far more complex than childhood fears. The melody flowed from her lips, each note carrying the weight of traditions passed down through generations of women who had survived impossible circumstances. "There you are." The voice cut through her song like a blade. Maria's eyes snapped, open to see Detective James Morrison standing at the mouth of the alley, his badge glinting under the streetlight. Behind him, 2 uniformed officers waited with their hands resting on their holsters. "Detective Morrison," Maria said, struggling to keep her voice steady, "I suppose you're here about the Henderson case." "You know exactly why I'm here, Maria. We found your prints at the scene. Your car was spotted 3 blocks away, and now you're hiding in an alley like a common criminal." Morrison stepped closer, his weathered face showing a mixture of disappointment and professional determination. "I've known your family for 15 years. Your mother used to make tamales for the precinct Christmas party. This isn't who you are." Maria laughed bitterly, pushing herself up from the ground. "You don't know who I am, detective? You know the version of me that existed before everything changed, before I learned what really happened to my father?" The detective's expression shifted slightly. "Your father died in a construction accident 12 years ago. What does that have to do with Thomas Henderson's murder?" "Everything," Maria's voice cracked. "Henderson wasn't just some random businessman. He was the site foreman who cut corners on safety regulations. He's the reason my father fell from that scaffold. He's the reason my family lost everything." Officer Sarah Chen, who had been listening from behind Morrison, stepped forward. "So, you killed him? Is that what you're telling us?" "I didn't kill anyone." Maria's eyes blazed with frustration. "But I won't pretend I'm sorry he's dead. Henderson destroyed my family and never faced consequences. While we struggled to pay rent and medical bills, he built a construction empire on the graves of workers he considered expendable." Morrison studied her face carefully. "If you didn't kill him, then why are you running? Why not come to the station and tell us what you know?" Maria glanced nervously toward the street. "Because the person who did kill Henderson is someone you'd never suspect, someone who's been hiding behind a collar in a congregation for years." The whistling began again, softer this time, as Maria felt the walls closing in around her. The Apache song had become her anchor, the only thing connecting her to strength when everything else felt like quicksand. Detective Morrison recognized the melody from his childhood spent on the reservation with his grandmother, though he'd never learned the words or their meaning. "Talk to me, Maria. Help me understand what's happening here." She wiped tears from her cheeks, leaving streaks of dirt across her skin. 3 weeks ago, I started researching Henderson's business practices for a wrongful death lawsuit. I thought maybe I could finally get justice for my father. What I found was so much worse than corner cutting on construction sites. Officer Chen pulled out her notepad. "What did you find?" "Financial records showing payments to city officials, forged safety inspections, witness intimidation, but the most damning evidence was a series of meetings between Henderson and Father Miguel Restrepo from St. Catherine's Church. They weren't discussing charity donations or community projects." Morrison's eyebrows rose. "Father Restrepo, he's been at St. Catherine's for over 20 years. Half the neighborhood considers him family. That's exactly why no one suspected." Maria's voice grew stronger as she continued. "Henderson was laundering money through the church's renovation fund. Father Restrepo would create fake invoices for construction work that never happened, then funnel the money back to Henderson's personal accounts. They were stealing from donations meant to help undocumented families pay for medical care and legal fees." The detective processed this information while studying Maria's face for signs of deception. Her story was specific enough to be verified, desperate enough to be true, but something still didn't add up. "Even if what you're saying is accurate, it doesn't explain why you're running from us instead of bringing this evidence to the police." Maria laughed again, but this time it held no humor. "Because Father Restrepo knows I discovered their scheme. Yesterday morning, he cornered me after my mother's doctor appointment at the clinic. He said Henderson was becoming a liability, asking for too much money and threatening to expose their operation if he didn't get a bigger cut." Officer Chen looked up from her notes. "Are you saying Father Restrepo confessed to murder?" "Not directly, but he made it clear that Henderson's death solved their problem, and that I could easily become the next problem that needed solving." Maria's hands shook as she remembered the conversation. "He said the church had connections throughout the police department and the district attorney's office. People who owed him favors. People who would make sure any investigation pointed away from him." Morrison felt his stomach tighten. The implications of Maria's accusations reached far beyond a simple murder case. If Father Restrepo had been corrupting officials for years, the entire foundation of law enforcement in their district could be compromised. Where's this evidence you mentioned? The financial records. Hidden in a safety deposit box at First National Bank. The key is taped under the sink in my apartment's kitchen. Maria's breathing became more labored. But I'm not sure it matters anymore. Father Restrepo has had 20 years to build his network of influence. My word against his won't be enough. The whistling resumed, fainter now as Maria's strength began to fade. The stress of the past few days, combined with little sleep and even less food, was taking its toll. Her vision blurred slightly, and she had to lean against the wall for support. Detective Morrison noticed her condition and gestured for Officer Chen to call for medical assistance. Maria, we need to get you to a hospital. You're in no condition to be making major decisions right now. No hospitals, she said firmly. Father Restrepo has connections there too. Nurses and doctors who attend his church, administrators who rely on his recommendations for their children's college applications. I've seen how his influence works. Officer Chen finished her radio call and approached cautiously. Maria, regardless of what you believe about Father Restrepo's connections, you need medical attention. You're clearly dehydrated and exhausted. I need to disappear. Maria's voice became distant, as if she were talking to herself rather than the officers. My grandmother always said that when the world becomes too dangerous, sometimes the only choice is to become invisible until the storm passes. Morrison crouched down to her eye level. Your grandmother sounds like a wise woman. But hiding won't solve this problem. If Father Restrepo is as corrupt as you claim, other people will suffer if he's not stopped. The mention of her grandmother seemed to strengthen Maria's resolve. She stood straighter and looked directly at the detective. My grandmother survived difficult times during the war. She taught me that sometimes the most dangerous enemy is the one everyone trusts without question. Then let's prove she was right. Come with us to the station. We'll examine your evidence and investigate these claims properly. Maria shook her head slowly. You don't understand. By tomorrow morning, that evidence will disappear. Father Restrepo will claim I'm a troubled young woman seeking attention after a family tragedy. The safety deposit box will be mysteriously emptied due to a clerical error. The financial records will be explained away as misunderstandings or forgeries. The Apache song continued as background to their conversation, growing weaker as Maria's condition deteriorated. Detective Morrison recognized the signs of someone pushed beyond their physical and emotional limits, but he also sensed the truth in her words. Officer Chen received confirmation that medical personnel were en route, but Maria's increasingly pale complexion suggested they might not arrive in time. Her whistling became more fragmented, the melody breaking apart like her ability to maintain composure. There's something else, Maria said, her voice barely above a whisper. Henderson wasn't Father Restrepo's first victim. I found records of 3 other deaths over the past 5 years. All people who had discovered aspects of his money laundering operation. All ruled accidental or suicide. Morrison felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. Do you have proof of these other deaths? Photos of the documents are on my phone. Upload them to a cloud account before. Maria's legs gave out, and she slumped against the wall. The whistling stopped abruptly as she struggled to stay conscious. Detective Morrison caught her before she could fall completely. Stay with me, Maria. The paramedics are almost here. Don't let the priest find me, she whispered urgently, gripping his arm with surprising strength. Promise me you won't let him near me at the hospital. He'll finish what he started. Officer Chen knelt beside them, checking Maria's pulse. Her heart rate is erratic. She's going into shock. The sound of sirens approached from the distance, but Morrison could see that Maria was fading fast. Her eyes rolled back, and her breathing became shallow and irregular. The key? Under the sink, box number 347. Maria's words came in. Fragments. Don't trust anyone who goes to St. Catherine's. The corruption goes deeper than you know. Detective Morrison held her steady as the paramedics arrived and began their assessment. Maria's final coherent words echoed in his mind as medical personnel worked to stabilize her condition. The Apache song had stopped, replaced by the mechanical sounds of emergency equipment and urgent medical terminology. As they loaded Maria into the ambulance, Morrison noticed Father Miguel Restrepo standing across the street, partially hidden in the shadows of a closed storefront. The priest's presence at this location, at this exact time, seemed far too coincidental to ignore. Officer Chen followed Morrison's gaze. Should we question him? Not yet. Let's see what Maria's evidence reveals first. If she's right about his connections, we need to be very careful about who we trust with this information. The ambulance disappeared into the night, its lights fading as it headed toward General Hospital. Morrison stood in the empty alley, replaying Maria's accusations, and trying to separate paranoia from legitimate concerns. The financial implications alone would require weeks of investigation, but the suggestion of multiple murders elevated this case to a completely different level. Father Restrepo had vanished from his observation point, leaving Morrison with more questions than answers. The detective's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Some secrets are better left buried. Think carefully about your next steps. Officer Chen read the message over his shoulder. Could be a coincidence. I don't believe in coincidences anymore. Morrison pocketed his phone and headed toward his car. We need to secure that safety deposit box before anyone else discovers its location. The drive to Maria's apartment took 15 minutes through nearly empty streets. Morrison used the time to call his supervisor and request a search warrant, though he omitted the specific details about Father Restrepo's alleged involvement. If Maria's concerns about corruption were justified, limiting the number of people with access to sensitive information would be crucial. Officer Chen searched the kitchen while Morrison examined the rest of the small apartment. The living room contained family photos spanning several generations, with particular emphasis on Maria's father and grandmother. The images revealed a close-knit family with deep cultural roots and strong traditions. Found it? Chen called from the kitchen. She held up a small brass key taped to the underside of the sink's cabinet. Box 347, just like she said. Morrison examined the key under better lighting. It appeared legitimate, with the bank's logo clearly visible on the head. We'll need to wait until morning to access the box legally. Bank security won't allow us inside without proper paperwork. The apartment search revealed additional evidence of Maria's investigation into Henderson's business practices. File folders contained copies of building permits, safety inspection reports, and worker compensation claims dating back 15 years. The level of detail suggested months of careful research rather than a hastily conceived revenge plot. Officer Chen discovered a laptop hidden behind books on Maria's bedroom shelf. The computer was password protected, but several printed emails were stuffed between the pages of a construction manual. The correspondence showed increasing tension between Henderson and an unnamed business partner about expanding operations and managing risk factors. Look at this, Chen said, holding up one of the emails. Henderson writes about our mutual friend in the collar becoming too greedy. The response talks about permanent solutions to temporary problems. Morrison read the emails carefully. The language was deliberately vague, but the implications were clear. Someone had been planning Henderson's death for several weeks, and religious imagery appeared throughout the correspondence. We need to get these to the lab for analysis. If Maria is right about Father Restrepo, these emails might provide the connection we need. The detective's phone rang as they prepared to leave the apartment. The caller ID showed General Hospital, and Morrison answered with growing concern about Maria's condition. Detective Morrison, this is Dr. Sarah Kim at General Hospital. I'm calling about Maria Santos, who was brought in earlier tonight. How is she? Physically? She's stable. We've treated her for dehydration and exhaustion, but there's something else you need to know. About 20 minutes ago, a priest arrived, claiming to be her family's spiritual advisor. He insisted on seeing her immediately. Morrison felt his blood pressure spike. Did you allow him access? That's why I'm calling. Something about his behavior seemed off. He was agitated when we explained that Ms. Santos had requested no religious visitors. He became quite insistent, almost demanding. Security had to escort him from the building. Can you describe this priest? Middle-aged, Hispanic, maybe 55 or 60, he identified himself as Father Restrepo from St. Catherine's Church. He said Maria's mother had sent him to provide comfort during her time of crisis. Morrison exchanged glances with Officer Chen. Doctor, I need you to restrict all access to Maria's room, except for medical personnel. No visitors without prior approval from the police department, and if Father Restrepo returns, call me immediately. The next morning arrived with gray skies and persistent drizzle that matched Morrison's mood. He had spent the night reviewing case files and trying to piece together the timeline of events leading to Henderson's death. Maria's story was compelling, but several elements still needed verification. Officer Chen met him at First National Bank when it opened at 9 o'clock. The safety deposit box access required to bank employees to witness the opening, and Morrison had arranged for a forensic accountant to analyze any financial documents they might discover. Box 347 contained exactly what Maria had promised: detailed financial records showing suspicious transactions between Henderson Construction and St. Catherine's Church. The documents revealed a complex scheme involving inflated invoices, fake renovation projects, and cash payments that had been ongoing for nearly 8 years. This is sophisticated, said Robert Chen, the forensic accountant. Someone with extensive knowledge of both construction contracts and church finances designed this system. The money trail shows approximately $2.3 million laundered through various church accounts. Detective Morrison photographed each document while Chen analyzed the financial patterns. The evidence was damning, but it still didn't prove Father Restrepo's direct involvement in Henderson's murder. There's something else, Chen continued, pulling out a manila envelope from the bottom of the box. Insurance policies on 3 individuals who died in the past 5 years. All substantial policies, all with St. Catherine's Church listed as beneficiary. Morrison opened the envelope and found death certificates for Marcus Webb, Jennifer Martinez, and David Park. All three had died in circumstances that were ruled accidental or suicide, just as Maria had claimed. Webb fell down a flight of stairs at his apartment building. Martinez drove her car off a bridge during a rainstorm. Park was found hanging in his garage. Morrison read from the death certificates what connected them to the money laundering operation. Chen pulled out additional documents. According to these records, all three had discovered financial irregularities in church accounts. Webb was the church's volunteer bookkeeper. Martinez worked for the bank that handled the church's accounts. Park was a construction worker who had questioned invoice discrepancies on renovation projects. The pattern was becoming clear. Father Restrepo had been systematically eliminating anyone who threatened to expose his criminal activities. Henderson's murder wasn't an isolated incident, but part of a larger pattern of violence designed to protect a multi-million-dollar operation. Detective Morrison's phone buzzed with a call from the hospital. Maria Santos was awake and requesting to speak with him immediately. Her voice sounded stronger than the previous evening, but carried an urgency that made Morrison concerned about her safety. Detective, you need to know something. I remembered more details about my conversation with Father Restrepo. He mentioned that Henderson wasn't his only problem. He said there were others who needed to be managed before they could cause difficulties. Who did he mention specifically? Dr. Amanda Foster, who's been questioning the church's medical charity fund. City Council member Robert Kim, who's been asking about construction permits for the church expansion, and Detective Sarah Park, who's been investigating financial crimes in the nonprofit sector. Morrison felt his stomach drop. Detective Park was David Park's sister, and she had been asking questions about her brother's death. If Father Restrepo saw her as a threat, she could be in immediate danger. However, as Morrison delved deeper into the investigation, he discovered something that would change everything. Hidden among the documents in Maria's safety deposit box was a birth certificate that revealed a shocking truth. Maria Santos wasn't just a random victim of Father Restrepo's corruption. The document showed that her real name was Maria Santos and Father Miguel was her uncle, the brother of her deceased father, Antonio. The revelation hit Morrison like a physical blow. Maria's father hadn't just been another construction worker killed due to safety violations. He had been Father Restrepo's own brother, murdered when he threatened to expose the early stages of the money laundering scheme 12 years ago. My God, Morrison whispered, staring at the birth certificate. She doesn't know. Maria has an idea that the priest she's been investigating killed her own father, his own brother. When Morrison rushed back to the hospital to share this discovery with Maria, her reaction was devastating. The woman who had been strong enough to investigate a complex criminal conspiracy and risk her life to expose the truth crumbled when she learned that her beloved Uncle Miguel, who had comforted her family after her father's death and visited them every Christmas, was actually the man who had murdered her father. He came to the funeral, Maria said, her voice breaking. He blessed my father's coffin. He told us that Papa was with God now, that his death wasn't in vain, all while knowing he was the one who killed him. The psychological manipulation was staggering. Father Restrepo had spent 12 years watching his brother's family struggle with poverty and grief, occasionally offering small amounts of charity assistance from the very funds he was stealing, all while maintaining the facade of a caring family priest. He would ask about my grades in school, Maria continued, tears streaming down her face. He encouraged me to study hard so I could have a better life than my father. He said Papa would be proud of my achievements. How could someone be so evil? Morrison realized that Father Restrepo's interest in Maria's education and career wasn't familial affection, but calculated monitoring. He had been keeping track of her capabilities and ambitions, ensuring that she never got close enough to the truth to threaten his operation. The investigation revealed that Antonio Santos had discovered his brother's initial theft from church funds and had confronted Father Restrepo privately, hoping to convince him to stop and make restitution. Instead, Father Restrepo had seen his brother as the first threat to his growing criminal enterprise and had staged the construction accident that killed him. Your father was a good man who trusted the wrong person, Morrison told Maria. He believed that family loyalty and religious faith could reform his brother. He never imagined that Miguel had already chosen money and power over everything else. The arrest of Father Miguel Restrepo took place at St. Catherine's Church during evening mass, just as he was delivering a sermon about the importance of family bonds and forgiveness. The irony wasn't lost on Morrison as he watched the man who had murdered his own brother being led away in handcuffs while his congregation looked on in shock and disbelief. The evidence against Father Restrepo was overwhelming. Financial records showed systematic theft of church funds totaling over $2.3 million. Forensic analysis of the suspicious deaths revealed a pattern of murder designed to eliminate witnesses. Most damning was the discovery of DNA evidence on construction equipment that had been used to stage Antonio Santos's accidental death 12 years earlier. During the trial, Father Restrepo maintained his innocence, claiming that he had been framed by enemies within the church hierarchy. His defense team argued that Antonio's death had indeed been a tragic accident and that the financial irregularities were the result of poor record-keeping rather than intentional fraud. However, the prosecution presented compelling evidence of Father Restrepo's guilt. Maria's testimony about his confession was corroborated by physical evidence and financial records. The jury was particularly moved by the revelation that he had murdered his own brother and then spent years manipulating the grieving family. The trial lasted 3 weeks, with extensive media coverage focusing on the betrayal of trust and the destruction of family bonds. Expert witnesses testified about the psychological profile of someone capable of such long-term deception and manipulation. Father Miguel Restrepo was convicted on all charges and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge noted during sentencing that the defendant had shown no remorse for his crimes and had continued to lie even when confronted with overwhelming evidence. Maria Santos found some measure of peace in the verdict, though the emotional scars from learning the truth about her uncle's crimes would take years to heal. She used the settlement from her wrongful death lawsuit to establish a foundation providing legal assistance to families of workers killed due to safety violations. Naming it in honor of her father Antonio, the community of St. Catherine's Church struggled to rebuild after the scandal. Many parishioners felt betrayed not only by Father Restrepo's financial crimes, but by the knowledge that he had murdered a member of his own family. The church appointed a new pastor and implemented strict financial oversight procedures to prevent future abuse. Detective Morrison was promoted to sergeant in recognition of his work on the case. The investigation had revealed systemic corruption that led to reforms in how nonprofit organizations were monitored and how construction permits were approved throughout the city. The Apache song that Maria Santos had whistled during her darkest moments became a symbol of resilience and survival. She learned more about her grandmother's traditions and began teaching the songs to young people in her community, ensuring that the wisdom of previous generations would continue to provide guidance during difficult times. Detective Sarah Park, whose brother David had been one of Father Restrepo's victims, found closure in knowing the truth about his death. She transferred to the Financial Crimes Unit and specialized in investigating nonprofit fraud, dedicating her career to preventing similar tragedies. Dr. Amanda Foster and City Council member Robert Kim, who had been marked as potential targets by Father Restrepo, worked together to implement new oversight procedures for charitable organizations and construction projects. Their efforts helped prevent future corruption schemes from taking root in the community. The case served as a stark reminder that evil can hide behind the most trusted faces and respected institutions. Father Restrepo's ability to maintain his public image while committing horrific crimes against his own family demonstrated the depths of human capacity for deception and betrayal. Years later, Maria Santos would reflect on the Apache song that had sustained her through the investigation. Her grandmother had taught her that the melody represented the strength of women who survived impossible circumstances. And Maria had indeed survived the discovery that the man she trusted as a spiritual guide was actually her father's killer. The song became a teaching tool in Maria's work with other victims of family violence and institutional abuse. She would tell them that survival wasn't just about physical endurance, but about maintaining hope and seeking truth, even when that truth was painful beyond imagination. The foundation established in Antonio Santos's memory grew to become one of the most effective advocacy organizations for construction worker safety in the region. Maria's personal tragedy had been transformed into a force for preventing similar losses in other families. The investigation into Father Restrepo's crimes also revealed the importance of financial transparency in religious organizations. New regulations required independent auditing of church funds and mandatory reporting of large financial transactions, making it much more difficult for similar schemes to operate undetected. The psychological impact on Maria of learning her uncle's true nature required years of therapy and support. The betrayal cut deeper than any stranger's crime could have, challenging her ability to trust others and believe in the goodness of people she had known her entire life. However, Maria's resilience, inherited from generations of strong women in her family, ultimately allowed her to transform her pain into purpose. The Apache song that had once been a simple childhood comfort became an anthem of survival and justice, carried forward to inspire others facing their own impossible circumstances. The case of Father Miguel Restrepo became a landmark in the prosecution of religious authority figures who abused their positions of trust. Law enforcement agencies across the country studied Morrison's investigation techniques and implemented new protocols for investigating financial crimes within nonprofit organizations. Maria Santos's courage in pursuing the truth despite personal danger and family connections served as an example for other whistleblowers facing powerful opponents. Her story proved that justice could prevail even against those who seemed untouchable, and that the bonds of family and community could be rebuilt even after devastating betrayal. The Apache song continued to be heard in Maria's community, taught to new generations who would carry forward its message of strength, survival, and the ultimate triumph of truth over deception. In the end, the melody that had sustained one woman through her darkest hour became a beacon of hope for countless others seeking justice in an often unjust world.